Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Abundance Matrix Underground podcast. Today we are diving into the concept of handlers and specifically how they play out for us psychically as reinforcers of the lack matrix. So this episode is for those of you who are rising in your frequency. Your resonance is becoming stronger and your reach is becoming greater. This is for people who are enacting sovereignty and you're rising in your influence and your capacity to receive. And it's for those of you who have escaped the cage of the lack matrix and the system has noticed. So you're not paranoid, you're powerful, and you're visible on the grid. Something that's not talked about enough is how psychically influenced that we are, and the more that we rise in visibility and capacity and influence, the stronger the counter influence of psychic attack can be. So this episode is not meant to bring about fear in anybody. This is just to help us understand how the sophisticated, intelligent system of lack works. So it's important that you know that when you break orbit with the lack matrix, something happens. It's noticeable because you are no longer containable. So the lack matrix loses its food source or a part of its food source. The matrix responds when you become sovereign. The way it does this, you could consider this like the immune system of the lack matrix, is it will send out energetic influences on your threshold, because when you are expanding your capacity, you're opening up energetic doors. Your threshold is becoming wider. You're moving through a threshold. And there's energetic enforcers of old programming that show up at those thresholds. Some people interpret this as tests, like tests from God before we expand into the next level. But ultimately, it is just the deep programming of lack saying, wait a minute, this is what you believe. You're doing something different than what you believe. You're not being in alignment with this belief anymore. Something's wrong. That's ultimately what it is. It can play out in incredibly scary ways depending on how deep we double down on lack. We'll get into that. So it's just important to know that these handlers show up at thresholds and they're energetic enforcers of old programming. They're entities. They're very alive. It's very spiritual. They don't control us. They try to reactivate fear and obedience to the system. So what we're diving into in today's episode is what handlers are as psychic mechanisms within the lack matrix, the subtle ways that fear and guilt try to pull us back into allegiance with the lack matrix, the nervous system patterns that handlers or these energetic entities hook into in our resonance field, how influence and abundance attract the attention of these handlers, and how to recognize handler energy without fear, without story, without going into the victim, aggressor, savior paradigm. And I also want to tap into why this is happening for people who are rising and expanding their capacity. So it's important for you to know that you're not being hunted. It's not like you're being hunted. You are exiting an old jurisdiction. And the pressure does not necessarily mean danger, although we can interpret it that, and the lack matrix wants us to, because that's how we sacrifice again. So we're not meant to be in fear with this. We are not being targeted. We're being reclaimed by sovereignty. And there's a whole process that happens when we do that. There is this sort of, again, these energetic handlers at the threshold that try to reinforce all of our fear, guilt, and shame patterns, specifically in our nervous system, through the victim, aggressor, savior storyline that makes us feel like we are going to be hurt or something bad is going to happen if we don't get in alignment, get back into line with allegiance with the lack matrix. So today is about naming that pattern. And if you are in the membership, the YouTube membership in the Empath Entrepreneur tier, you will be hearing this first. Actually, all members will be hearing this first. But inside the Empath Entrepreneur tier of the membership, we're in the Queen of Pentacles season, and we will work with this specific energy of handlers through somatic release. So we're going to learn to move from reactive intuition or like psychic hypervigilance to sovereign primal instincts when it comes to our God self, and from vigilance, that hypervigilance, to embodied authority. So in the membership, we will go into specifically how these handler energies hooks into the body and what parts of the body they affect the most. And we'll go into some rituals and somatic codes to help dissolve that energy within the body, because we do have to address it in the central nervous system. And I also have subliminals in there that will help reset this pattern in the body. And I'm also going to be posting some journal prompts to help get here, to help see where we might have this handler energy within us, see how it's affecting our body. So if you're listening to this on my podcast or on any of my public channels, my public YouTube channel, and you want to actually go deeper with this, join us in the Empath Entrepreneur tier of the membership, because we're going to be going a lot deeper into this. So, we are working with the Queen of Pentacles in this season. She's all about embodied sovereignty, grounded power, and nervous system wealth. She is the queen of the body itself. She breaks this handler resonance by rooting us into the body, rooting us into belonging within the source that created us. And in this season, we are practicing ritual, rhythm, regulation, and receiving. So I want to just jump right in, and if you want more about the membership, check the show notes or the video description. So first of all, in this episode, I want to talk a little bit about, sorry, I'm pulling up my notes too so that I have all of them, because there's a lot to cover. I want to talk a little bit about how handlers operate within the lack matrix specifically. And this is, as I said earlier, part of how the immune system of the lack matrix works. So it has to catch people who are growing in capacity, choosing anomaly, because that's a threat to the system itself. It's a food source that's being taken. So it has these handlers, I'm going to call them handlers, that get activated to keep its food source secure. So they're not really, I don't want you to think of this as energetic entities that are assigned to watch you. They're actually frequency stabilizers of the old grid. They just help stabilize the frequency of lack. They can appear as psychic hooks. They're energetic enforcers of scarcity. So anything that enforce this idea that there's not enough. They're fear reactivators, shame messengers, doubt inducers, pattern holders of unworthiness, so how these patterns play out in our physical body. Trauma loop triggers is how they show up, and emotional control fields, essentially trying to keep us in the resonance of lack. There's not enough. We're not enough. We have to decide who's worthy, and something always has to be sacrificed. So they're from a program. They're programmatic intelligences is how you could say it. They're not ultimate authorities, and they don't actually have power outside of what we feed them. So think of it like algorithms in our consciousness, or thought forms that are given power by collective participation. They're archetypal scarcity guardians. Again, the immune system of the lack matrix, energetic middle management of fear. They don't create lack, they maintain it. They keep the grid of lack specifically intact by keeping souls in trauma-bonded exchange with fear. So when do handlers activate in our reality? They activate at thresholds. Like I said, anytime we are about to expand into a new capacity to receive, because if you can receive more, it helps us to understand and believe that there is more, that there is enough. So when somebody remembers that they are created in the image of God, that they're not victims to life, but they're co-creators with life, when abundance begins to flow in somebody's reality and they start to feel the energy and the frequency of enough, there's enough of needs being met. When someone reaches a new level of visibility or influence, and this can be online, yes, but it can also just be in their family, in their energetic circles, in their career. When power shifts from external obedience to internal sovereignty, when we start getting our authority from within, that's when they get activated. They get activated when love becomes stronger than survival mechanisms. Handlers are activated. And when somebody decides to stop negotiating with shame, handlers get activated. When our resonance becomes contagious, handlers get activated. So handlers show up when you're about to exit the system's jurisdiction, the system of lack. They're energetic custom agents, you could say, of the old world. So how do they operate? I don't believe that handlers psychically attack us. I believe that they emotionally rehook us into the psychic grid of lack. And once we're in the psychic grid of lack, there is psychic attack. That's what it's all about. It's incredibly psychic. It's a psychic war. So these handlers, energetic entities, influences, use guilt, shame, sudden insecurity spikes. We'll just all of a sudden feel very insecure, get these imposter syndromes. Like, who do you think you are? They'll show up as a fear of backlash or abandonment. If we keep stepping into our power, there's going to be backlash to it. They can show up as this idea of be humbled or you'll be punished. And humble is something that we should have a whole episode on because that has been hijacked. Sudden compulsions to self-sabotage are another way that they show up. When we feel this temptation to shrink or apologize or collapse within ourselves, when we feel discomfort from receiving from others, when others want to give to us and it feels incredibly discomfort, that's a sign of a handler being activated. Or the belief that you must pay in some way, shape, or form, usually energetically, usually through your life force, usually through your emotional field, to have a need met. So handlers are always going to press old trauma points. And remember, these trauma points have literal activated patterns in your central nervous system that reinforce you and cause you to act in the same patterns you've always done. And that's how it keeps fed. That's how it keeps feeding the lack matrix. So they press these old trauma points because the lack matrix runs on unmet needs. Remember that, unhealed needs and emotional debt. So when someone rises, it's like the system is whispering psychically to you, return to dependency. This isn't safe. You're not safe. So why do handlers specifically target leaders? Leaders, we are experiencing and about to experience a whole new wave of leaders and leadership. This is what the book, The Empath Leader, is all about. The book that I co-wrote with Claudia Catarucci and other authors. If you haven't checked it out yet, you can check it out in my show notes, in my video description. But nonetheless, this is something that we tap on there, is just in the 3D world, even how leadership is changing and how the world is craving a different type of leadership because we're seeing through the matrix and we're seeing how corrupt it is. So handlers target leaders because leaders have influence and leaders influence the masses. So because leaders carry resonance codes, they're targeted. Because resonance, when your resonance shifts, you have a much further reach. One person who has shifted their resonance in a greater capacity is more influential than 100 people who are still in the lack matrix patterning. So one awakened empath can disrupt the grid, and our reach is greater when our capacity to receive grows. So the more sovereign we become, we destabilize the hierarchy. One woman who receives without apology can collapse an entire scarcity timeline. One man who refuses to be shamed and becomes ungovernable by fear can collapse an entire timeline. Handlers will not waste energy on people who are sleeping. They target those who are waking up and sparking new worlds. And this is why we have to understand how they work. Remember, be cunning as a serpent. We have to be cunning and understand how the system works, because the system is cunning and the system does not care about our thriving or our well-being. It's important to understand that. It is set up. It is literally created to keep us in lack. So what is the lack matrix really afraid of when we become sovereign? Obviously, it's at the core level afraid of its food source being taken. But really, what they fear is how the mechanism of God works, which is uninterrupted abundance. Ask and you shall receive. I talked about this in last week's podcast episode. The mechanism of God is ask and you shall receive. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will open. It's not ask and then jump through hoops and prove you're worthy and I'll give you a list of things to do and then you'll receive. It's ask and you shall receive. And the receiving comes immediately through resonance. The resonance of the ask is a co-creation with God. And then that resonance inspires action. It's much different than saying, okay, first I have to prove I'm worthy of it and then I might get it. We talked about that in last week's episode. So God works by uninterrupted flow of abundance. That's why I said in last week's episode, we must receive to the point of overflow. We must overflow. And then when we give from overflow, that completely heals the system because the system of lack is built on unmet needs. It thrives because of that. So abundance generates self-trust, overflow, generosity, and creative power, which would start to solve all the issues that we have. We start creating a future. We start meeting the unmet needs. And then suddenly the need and the dependency on the system becomes obsolete. So the lack matrix cannot survive when we are in sovereign, authoritative trust with our inner being, where we come from. So I want to talk a little bit about how to recognize a handler activation within your resonance field. So these are things often suddenly they come upon us, especially remember they target us when we are expanding our capacity to receive. So you'll suddenly feel this energetic shame of, I don't deserve this, or I'm doing too much. I'm too much. I shared too much of myself. The shame of when what is it? There's a name for it, but when you overshare and that after you share and that embarrassment that comes up, I know there's a term for that. I can't think of it, but I'm doing too much. I shared too much. I showed too much of my light. I need to slow down my success so that other people don't feel threatened by me. Also, because psychically what happens when energetic handlers are activated is that those around us, all of their wounds of scarcity will be triggered by our capacity to grow. So everything that they believe about not being worthy, not being good enough, often you will be the target of their projection. And so it truly does and can activate this feeling of I won't have any relationships, I won't belong if I'm successful. And so a lot of people choose to just keep their capacity to receive, their receiving channel closed off because it feels like a threat to their community. So something bad will happen if I shine, or I'll lose people, or I'll become a target or an enemy, or people won't like me. People will feel jealous of me, which can feel like a threat too. So I should sacrifice now to feel safe. We will often experience when you feel a sudden guilt for thriving, when you've expanded your capacity, or a sudden guilt for doing well, a sudden guilt for feeling liberated, that's a sign of a handler, an energetic handler activating in your energetic field. Also, if you have any panic around visibility or receiving, sudden like panic attacks or just feelings of anxiety, or this feeling of, I need to do something good. I need to do something good. I need to be altruistic to balance your worth in some way. And again, there's times when we authentically from within get inspired. And when we're in alignment with God, it will happen a lot. Well, we will be inspired to give, but it doesn't come from fear of, oh no, if I don't do this thing might happen. That's what we have to be aware of. So handlers will make prosperity feel dangerous, and it'll make you feel like you might lose everything, or you're unsafe because your freedom threatens their extinction. And these are living entities. They're alive because we've created them and we fuel them. And remember, they've been fueled for thousands of years. This system has been sacrificed to thousands of years. So this is powerful. It's not something don't take it lightly. Don't be afraid of it, but it has powerful ways that it works, which is why anyone who has raised and opened their capacity to receive and has become more of an influence, has a greater reach, will tell you how powerful this is, even if it's just psychic. So I do not believe these are demons, although I do think demons are a little bit different. And we can talk about demons in a whole and again, everyone has their different meanings for these, but when I say handler, I am talking about something different than a demon. A demon to me is a belief that has been fed for so long that it has become an entity. And handlers are similar, but handlers are more the reinforcers or the frequency stabilizers of lack, whereas demons feed off the wounds. They literally exist because they're animated through agreements that we've made with lack. So it's a little bit different. They can have strongholds over us in a different way. And they often show up as vices and addictions and things like that, suppressed power. So handlers are more like programs that are losing authority because you're waking up. They're echoes of your obedience to the lack matrix. They're not your rulers, and they only function where your self-doubt still lives, or where you still have beliefs that the external is where you get your power from, or where you get your sense of worth from, or your identity from. So when you see them, with handlers specifically, when you see them, they weaken. The counterspell here for handlers, there's many things that we can do, but I find that speaking out loud, first of all, recognizing when they've been activated, and you can use all of those ways that I just listed, recognizing when handler energy has been activated, and then saying out loud, literally using your words to rebuke them or send them away, or just like they dissolve when you look them in the face and say, you have no power over me. I am not beholden to the architecture of fear. I revoke allegiance to the lack matrix. My abundance is sovereign. My rise is ordained. My destiny is ordained. No authority governs my receiving but love. Or you could say, but God. No authority governs me but God. And especially no authority governs my ability or capacity to receive but God. I am unhandleable. Handlers don't disappear when they're ignored. It's important to understand that. They dissolve when they are named without fear. Demons are the same way. You have to name them. You have to name them. You have to ask for their name. Ask what they're doing here. Ask what kind of authority they have, or they got that authority. You get the information. You get names, you get numbers. That you don't ignore them. That is the worst way to approach this kind of stuff. You face them directly. So naming is not bowing down. It's releasing their authority. It's saying, I know what you are. I know what you're doing. I know why you're here. I revoke permission for this. So if you have felt any pressure at all lately as you've been stepping into your power, if you've felt any sudden urges to hide or shrink, or if you've felt waves of shame or that like embarrassment that comes after you've been vulnerable, then it's important to know that you are passing a threshold, and it's a powerful threshold that many of us are walking through right now, because it's a next level of sovereignty that has not yet been seen on this planet. It has not been able to have been seen up to this point, because we've all been so duped and hypnotized by the lack matrix, by the us versus them mentality, by the bullshit political game. We've all been duped by that. So as you pass through this threshold, the system of lack will notice. It will notice that your energy is leaving, and it will reach for you. It will attempt to stabilize you back into the psychic flock of those of us of everyone who is obedient to the belief that there's not enough. So I don't want you to think of handlers as enemies. They show up when you're crossing the veil. So you can even approach it like, oh, this is cool. If handlers are showing up, it means I'm stepping into my next level of capacity. And it also means you're more vulnerable and you need more than you've needed in the past, because a greater influence, a greater psychic influence is now being employed to you. Being like you are being assigned to this greater psychic influence of lack. So it's important that you understand that you need more psychic. I was going to say psychic protection, but sometimes that can activate fear. I think we need to be more psychically rooted in God. We need to work with the astral field, work with our energetic hygiene, work with our imagination, because we can literally put things around us, colors, symbols, angels, things that God gives us specifically. Sometimes God will specifically give you symbols to put in your energetic field that will protect you. Handlers will notice. And when you have things in place, you protect yourself, you protect your peace, you protect your psychic influence so that you can grow even more. And you are being asked, as I said in last week's recording, to receive to a capacity that makes the lack matrix obsolete. You're not doing more, you're receiving more. You're expanding your capacity to receive. You're not trying to have more output, and there's no try here. This is a receiving posture. It's a receiving posture, and that's the important thing to remember. So that's it. I wanted to try to make this short and sweet. Next week, the next podcast, I don't even know if I'm going to wait a whole week, because I have these already lined out and I just feel like this urge to send these out. So the next podcast that I post will be about controlled opposition, what it means in the lack matrix, both literally and politically, and how we can understand that even when people throw around terms like, oh, he's controlled opposition, she's controlled opposition, it's a way of reinforcing the lack matrix, and it is a trap. So I'm going to be talking about that, talking about how it works in lack, why it's there, and how we can see through it, because there's a lot of people waking up right now to that the system is corrupt, but they're doubling down on the lack matrix, which is the war, the victim, aggressor, savior paradigm. So just a greater polarity is being fueled. And this is why you'll start to have people say, we can't trust anything. It's all rigged. It's all wrong. It's all da 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 da. And that is a minimizing of our power. And it's important that we don't fall for that. So that'll be the next podcast that I post. And from there we will also have a deeper somatic practice from that podcast in the membership as well. So of course, if you want to go deeper, join the membership. We have a lot going on there. Our 14-day glow up's coming up. We've been preparing for that. We're working with the Queen of Pentacles. We're working with seasons, rhythms, ritual, and our bodies specifically. So I hope to see you there. Much love, and I will see you in the next audio.